Maria settled into a stable shooting position, drawing on years of training and natural ability. She adjusted the rifle stock against her shoulder and found the proper cheek weld that would ensure consistent sight alignment. Her breathing naturally slowed as she entered the focused mindset that her father had taught her during those weekend shooting sessions. Through the high-powered scope, she could now clearly see individual enemy combatants moving across the desert terrain. They were advancing in tactical formations that indicated professional military training. Their equipment and coordination suggested this was not a random attack, but a well-planned assault on the base. The enemy force had divided into 3 groups approaching from different directions. One group was moving directly toward the main gate, while 2 flanking elements attempted to approach the base from the sides. Their strategy was sound and would have been effective against a less prepared defensive position. Maria began identifying priority targets based on their weapons and apparent leadership roles. Enemy personnel carrying heavy weapons or directing others represented the greatest threats to base defenders. Her role was to eliminate these high-value targets before they could effectively engage friendly forces. The first incoming artillery rounds landed approximately 200 meters from the base perimeter. The enemy was using the bombardment to suppress defensive positions while their assault teams moved closer. Dust and smoke began to obscure parts of the battlefield, making target identification more challenging. Base defenders opened fire as enemy forces entered the designated engagement zones. The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the perimeter. Tracers streaked across the desert as defensive positions engaged advancing hostile forces. Maria acquired her first target through the scope. An enemy soldier carrying a rocket-propelled grenade launcher was positioning himself to engage one of the base's defensive positions. The range was approximately 600 meters, well within the rifle's effective capability. She controlled her breathing and aligned the scope's crosshairs on the target's center mass. Years of training had taught her to focus on the fundamentals regardless of external pressure or noise. The chaos of battle faded into background awareness as she concentrated on the shot. The rifle's trigger broke cleanly, and Maria felt the weapon recoil against her shoulder. Through the scope, she observed the target fall and confirmed the successful engagement. Her first combat shot had been accurate and effective, eliminating a significant threat to friendly forces. Morrison's voice came over the radio, coordinating defensive fire and movement. His team was engaging enemy forces that had reached the base perimeter wire. The battle was developing exactly as intelligence had predicted, with enemy forces attempting to breach the defensive line at multiple points. Maria acquired a second target, an enemy leader who appeared to be directing the assault on the main gate. He was positioned behind cover but exposed enough for a precision shot. The range was approximately 700 meters, requiring careful consideration of wind and bullet drop. She made the necessary scope adjustments and settled into another steady shooting position. The target was partially concealed, requiring her to wait for a clear shot opportunity. Patience was as important as accuracy in precision shooting, especially under combat conditions. When the target moved into clear view, Maria was ready. Her shot was immediately followed by confirmation that another priority threat had been eliminated. The enemy assault on the main gate began to lose coordination as their leadership was systematically engaged by precision fire. The battle continued for another 20 minutes, with Maria providing continuous overwatch support to base defenders. She engaged multiple targets at ranges extending beyond the capability of other defensive positions. Her elevated position and precision weapon allowed her to dominate areas of the battlefield that would otherwise have been difficult to control. Enemy forces began to withdraw after suffering significant casualties and losing their leadership structure. The coordinated assault had been disrupted by effective defensive fire and the loss of key personnel. Their withdrawal was disorganized and hasty, indicating that their mission had failed. As the immediate threat diminished, Maria continued to observe the battlefield through the scope. Scattered enemy personnel were visible in the distance, but they appeared to be retreating rather than regrouping for another assault. The base defense had been successful. Morrison's voice came over the radio again, this time reporting that the perimeter was secure and enemy forces were in full retreat. Air support had arrived, and was pursuing the withdrawing hostile forces. The immediate threat to forward operating base Blackwater had been eliminated. Maria maintained her position for another 15 minutes, providing overwatch while base personnel conducted damage assessment and casualty evacuation. Several base defenders had been wounded during the engagement, but no fatalities had occurred among friendly forces. When Morrison returned to the shooting range platform, he found Maria still in position behind the rifle. She had maintained professional discipline throughout the engagement, continuing to provide security even after the immediate threat had passed. "Outstanding work, Sergeant," Morrison said as he approached her position. "Your precision fire was instrumental in breaking up their assault. You eliminated at least 6 priority targets and prevented them from effectively using their heavy weapons." Maria carefully safed the weapon and handed it back to Morrison. Her hands were steady, showing no signs of the adrenaline that typically affected soldiers during their first combat experience. Her natural composure and training had carried her through the engagement successfully. Morrison examined the rifle briefly before slinging it back onto his tactical vest. He had entrusted his primary weapon to a soldier he had never worked with before, and she had proven worthy of that trust. Such confidence was rare in combat situations and spoke to Maria's exceptional character. "I'm going to recommend you for transfer to a marksmanship instructor position," Morrison continued. "Your abilities are being wasted in logistics. The military needs qualified instructors who can train other soldiers to this standard." Maria felt a surge of pride and satisfaction at Morrison's recognition. The opportunity to use her shooting abilities in a more meaningful role had always been her goal. This combat engagement had provided the demonstration of capability that could change her entire career trajectory. The base commander arrived at the shooting range to personally thank Maria for her contribution to the defensive operation. Word had spread quickly about the logistics sergeant who had provided critical precision fire support using a Navy SEAL's rifle. Her performance had exceeded all expectations and earned respect throughout the base. In the weeks that followed, Maria's transfer to the marksmanship training unit was approved and expedited. Her combat performance had provided undeniable evidence of her capabilities and potential value as an instructor. The morning she had spent cleaning brass casings had led to an opportunity that would define her military career. Morrison remained at Forward Operating Base Blackwater for another month before rotating back to his home unit. Before departing, he visited the shooting range one final time to see Maria conducting marksmanship training for other soldiers. She was teaching a group of infantry soldiers the same fundamentals that her father had taught her years earlier. Proper stance, breathing control, sight alignment, and trigger squeeze were the building blocks of accurate shooting. These skills, combined with mental discipline and confidence, created effective marksmen. "Your father would be proud," Morrison said when Maria finished the training session. He had learned about her background during their conversations after the battle. "He always said that skills unused are skills wasted," Maria replied. "I'm grateful you gave me the chance to prove what I could do." Morrison nodded and shook her hand before departing. The trust he had placed in her during those critical moments had been validated beyond any doubt. Maria had transformed from a logistics specialist cleaning brass casings into a respected marksmanship instructor whose skills would benefit countless other soldiers. The shooting range where Maria had been working that morning became a reminder of how quickly circumstances can change and how preparation combined with opportunity can alter the course of a career. Her story became legendary among base personnel, inspiring other soldiers to pursue excellence in their individual capabilities. Years later, Maria would become one of the military's most respected marksmanship instructors, training thousands of soldiers in precision shooting techniques. Her expertise, proven under actual combat conditions, made her uniquely qualified to prepare others for similar challenges. The brass casings that she had been collecting that morning remained in a container on the range, a simple reminder of the routine task that had been interrupted by history. Sometimes the most significant moments in a person's life begin with the most ordinary circumstances. Morrison studied Maria's stance and the way she naturally positioned herself on the range platform. Her movements were economical and purposeful, showing an understanding of proper positioning and situational awareness. Most importantly, She displayed the kind of calm focus that could not be taught in training, but came from inner discipline. "Sergeant, what's your marksmanship qualification?" Morrison asked, his voice cutting through the increasing noise of base-wide preparations. "Expert marksman, sir. Qualified on multiple weapons systems," Maria replied without hesitation. Her response was direct and confident, containing no false modesty or exaggeration. Morrison nodded, processing this information quickly. He had worked with enough soldiers to recognize genuine competence versus bravado. Maria's bearing and immediate response indicated real capability rather than empty claims. The radio on Morrison's tactical vest erupted with urgent communications. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy force consisted of approximately 40 hostile combatants with heavy weapons and vehicles. They were advancing on the base using a coordinated attack pattern that suggested professional military training. Base defensive positions were being established around the perimeter, but the elevated shooting range offered unique advantages. From this position, a skilled marksman could engage targets at distances that exceeded the effective range of most defensive positions around the base. Morrison made a decision that went against standard military protocol, but reflected the reality of combat situations where conventional rules sometimes yielded to practical necessity. He began unslinging his custom sniper rifle, a decision that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. The weapon was a modified M24 sniper weapon system with specialized optics and custom ammunition. Morrison had personally selected and tested every component of the rifle. The weapon represented thousands of rounds of practice ammunition and countless hours of training to achieve the level of precision required for SEAL operations. "Sergeant Santos, I need someone to provide overwatch support from this position," Morrison said, his eyes focused on the approaching dust clouds that marked the enemy advance. "My team needs to coordinate ground defense, but this range position cannot remain unmanned." Maria understood the implications of Morrison's statement immediately. He was considering entrusting her with one of the most critical defensive positions on the base. The shooting range offered commanding views of all approach routes and could provide devastating fire support to defending units. The sound of helicopters could be heard in the distance, but they were too far away to provide immediate assistance. The base would need to hold its defensive positions using only the personnel and equipment currently available. Air support and reinforcements were at least 30 minutes away. Morrison looked at Maria directly, making an assessment that combined military judgment with combat intuition. He had survived multiple deployments by making quick decisions about personnel capabilities under extreme pressure. His evaluation would determine whether he trusted her with equipment that could mean the difference between successful defense and base overrun. "I need to know if you can handle precision fire at extended range under combat conditions," Morrison said. "This is not about qualification scores or training exercises. This is about real-world capability when lives depend on accuracy." Maria met his gaze steadily. She understood that this moment would define not only her role in the coming battle, but potentially her entire military career. The opportunity to prove her capabilities under actual combat conditions was something that most soldiers in support roles never experienced. "I can do it, sir," she replied with quiet confidence. Her response came not from arrogance, but from honest self-assessment based on years of shooting experience and natural ability. Morrison studied her face for any signs of doubt or overconfidence. He found neither. Maria displayed the kind of steady determination that he had learned to trust in combat situations. Her response indicated understanding of the responsibility rather than eagerness for glory. The enemy advance was now visible to the naked eye. Vehicles and personnel could be seen moving across the desert terrain approximately 2 miles from the base perimeter. Their approach was methodical and coordinated, suggesting experienced leadership and tactical planning. Base defenders were taking final positions around the perimeter. Machine gun teams were setting up interlocking fields of fire, while communications personnel maintained contact with off-base support units. Every available soldier was being utilized in the defensive plan. Morrison began explaining the rifle's characteristics and operating procedures to Maria. The weapon was more sophisticated than the standard infantry rifle she had trained with, but the basic principles of marksmanship remained the same. proper sight alignment, breathing control, and trigger squeeze were universal concepts. The custom optics required brief explanation, as the magnification and reticle system were more advanced than standard military scopes. Morrison showed her the range estimation features and bullet drop compensation markings that would be essential for accurate long-range engagement. The rifle is zeroed at 400 meters, Morrison explained while pointing out the scope adjustments. Wind compensation and range estimation are marked on the reticle. Trust your training and take your time with each shot. Maria nodded, absorbing the technical information quickly. Her experience with various weapon systems during training allowed her to understand the rifle's capabilities without extensive explanation. The fundamentals of precision shooting were already ingrained in her muscle memory. The base commander's voice came over the loudspeaker system, providing updates on enemy positions and expected contact time. All defensive positions were to hold fire until targets entered designated engagement zones. The plan was to allow the enemy force to advance into a coordinated kill zone before opening fire. Morrison handed Maria additional magazines and specialized ammunition for the rifle. Each round represented significant expense and development, designed for maximum accuracy and effectiveness at extended range. The ammunition was match-grade precision rounds that far exceeded the capability of standard military issue. Remember that every shot needs to count, Morrison said as he prepared to rejoin his team. This position will be critical for supporting our defensive lines. Your fire will need to be accurate and selective. Maria accepted the weapon with both hands, feeling the balanced weight and precision engineering that made it an exceptional tool. The rifle represented trust that Morrison was placing in her abilities and judgment under combat conditions. The enemy force was now approximately 1 mile from the base perimeter and closing steadily. Their advance had slowed as they began to spread out and take tactical positions for the final assault. Professional military training was evident in their movement patterns and coordination. Morrison took one final look at Maria as she familiarized herself with the rifle and scope system. He saw a soldier who understood the gravity of the situation and was prepared to meet the challenge. His decision to trust her with this responsibility reflected years of experience in evaluating personnel under extreme pressure. As Morrison prepared to leave the range platform, the first sounds of incoming artillery could be heard in the distance. The enemy force was beginning their preparatory bombardment before the main assault. The battle for forward operating base Blackwater was about to begin in earnest. Maria took her position behind the rifle, adjusting the scope and checking sight lines across the terrain. She could see the dust clouds marking enemy positions and began to estimate ranges and wind conditions. Everything her father had taught her on the family ranch was about to be tested under actual combat conditions. The radio chatter intensified as various defensive positions reported ready status. Machine gun teams confirmed fields of fire, while communications personnel maintained contact with supporting units. The base had transformed from a training facility into a coordinated defensive position. Morrison reached the bottom of the platform and looked back once more at Maria. He gave a brief nod that conveyed both confidence and expectation. The success of the defensive operation would depend on every soldier performing at their maximum capability, and Maria was now a critical part of that effort. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Sergeant Maria Santos methodically cleaned the brass casings scattered across the shooting range. Her movements were precise and efficient, a habit formed through years of military discipline. The sound of metal clinking against metal echoed in the early morning silence as she sorted the spent ammunition into organized piles. Maria had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Blackwater for 8 months now. As a logistics specialist, her duties rarely involved combat operations, but she had volunteered for range maintenance to earn extra duty pay. The work was tedious, but she found peace in the routine. The shooting range was one of the few places on base where she could think clearly without the constant noise of helicopters, truck engines, and shouting soldiers. She had grown up in a small town in Texas where her father taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. Every weekend, they would drive out to the family ranch and practice with his old hunting rifle. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had insisted that knowing how to handle weapons was essential life knowledge. Those childhood lessons had served her well during basic training, where she consistently scored among the top marksmen in her unit. The irony was not lost on her that despite her shooting abilities, she had been assigned to supply chain management rather than infantry or special operations. The military had its own logic about personnel placement, and Maria had learned not to question the system too much. She focused on excelling in her assigned role while maintaining her marksmanship skills during off-duty hours. As she worked, Maria noticed movement in the distance beyond the range. A small convoy of vehicles was approaching the base perimeter. This was unusual for this early in the morning, as most supply runs and patrols were scheduled for later in the day. She paused her work and shielded her eyes from the sun to get a better look. The convoy consisted of 3 armored vehicles moving at high speed toward the main gate. Something about their approach seemed urgent, almost desperate. Maria had been on base long enough to recognize the difference between a routine return and an emergency situation. The vehicles were moving too fast and kicking up too much dust for a normal patrol return. Her radio crackled to life with chatter from the communications center. The voices were tense and speaking in rapid, clipped sentences that indicated a developing situation. Maria could not make out all the details, but she heard fragments about contact with enemy forces and casualties. Within minutes, the base alarm system activated. The loud, piercing sound that every soldier dreaded echoed across the facility. Maria immediately dropped the brass casings she was holding and instinctively moved toward the nearest defensive position. Years of training had conditioned her to respond automatically to threat warnings. The convoy reached the main gate, and Maria could see soldiers jumping out of the vehicles. Some were helping wounded comrades, while others were taking defensive positions around the perimeter. The urgency of their movements confirmed that this was not a drill or routine exercise. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, a Navy SEAL attached to the base for special operations, emerged from the lead vehicle. Even from a distance, Maria could see that his tactical gear was covered in dust, and his team appeared to be in a state of high alert. Morrison was known among the base personnel as a consummate professional who had completed multiple tours in various conflict zones. Morrison quickly surveyed the base layout, assessing defensive capabilities and potential vulnerabilities. His eyes swept across the facility until they focused on the elevated shooting range where Maria was positioned. The range offered an excellent vantage point with clear sight lines across the surrounding terrain. The radio chatter became more intense, with reports of enemy forces pursuing the returning convoy. Intelligence indicated that a significant hostile force was approximately 15 minutes behind the convoy and approaching the base perimeter. The base commander was coordinating defensive measures and calling for additional support from nearby units. Maria realized that her position on the range might become strategically important. The elevated platform provided one of the best overwatch positions on the entire base. She began moving the cleaning equipment out of the way and prepared the position for potential defensive use. Morrison appeared at the bottom of the range platform, breathing heavily from his sprint across the base. He looked up at Maria with an expression of grim determination mixed with urgency. Without hesitation, he began climbing the stairs to the shooting platform. When Morrison reached the top of the platform, he quickly assessed Maria's military bearing and the organized state of the range equipment. He could immediately tell that she was a soldier who took pride in her work and maintained high standards. This initial impression would prove to be crucial in the decisions he was about to make. The sound of distant gunfire could now be heard echoing across the desert landscape. The enemy forces were closer than initially estimated, and the base defensive preparations were still incomplete. Morrison knew that every available defensive position needed to be manned by capable personnel. He looked at Maria directly and spoke with the calm authority that comes from years of combat experience. His next words would change the trajectory of both their lives and the outcome of the battle that was about to unfold. The wind picked up across the range, carrying the smell of dust and gunpowder from the approaching conflict. Maria stood at attention, ready to receive orders from the senior non-commissioned officer. Everything in her training had prepared her for this moment, though she could never have imagined the specific circumstances that were about to test her abilities. Morrison carried a custom sniper rifle, a weapon that represented years of specialized training and countless hours of practice. The rifle was an extension of his capabilities as a marksman, carefully calibrated and maintained to deliver precision fire at extreme distances. For a SEAL, his weapon was as personal and important as any relationship in his life. The base loudspeakers crackled to life with orders for all personnel to man defensive positions. The commanding officer's voice was steady but urgent, outlining the threat level and expected timeline for enemy contact. Every soldier on the base understood that the next few hours would test their training, equipment, and resolve. Maria could see other soldiers taking positions around the base perimeter. Machine gun nests were being established, and communications personnel were coordinating with off-base support units. The base was transforming from a routine training facility into an active combat zone. The reality of the situation settled over Maria as she realized that her morning routine of cleaning brass casings had suddenly become preparation for actual combat. The shooting range that had been a place of peaceful work was about to become a critical defensive position in a real battle. Morrison checked his equipment one final time, ensuring that everything was secure and ready for immediate use. His movements were deliberate and efficient, the result of muscle memory developed through countless training exercises and real-world operations. Every piece of his gear had a specific purpose and location. As the distant gunfire grew louder and more frequent, both soldiers understood that the approaching enemy force was substantial and well-equipped. This would not be a minor skirmish, but a significant engagement that would require all available resources and personnel to repel successfully. The moment of decision had arrived, and Morrison looked at Maria with the kind of assessment that experienced combat soldiers use to evaluate potential allies in life-threatening situations. What he saw in her bearing and demeanor would determine his next critical choice.